Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're taking your sources, historical records, architectural plans, even engineering reports, and we're heading straight to 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue.
That's right.
And this isn't just about who lived there. We are getting into the literal nuts and bolts, the stone, the steel, the human story of how the White House was built and, maybe more importantly, how it's been rebuilt over and over again.
It's a fantastic story because the White House is so much more than a building. It really is a living museum of American history.
A living museum, I like that.
Yeah, and when you look at its design, the compromises, the renovations from, the very beginning in 1792 all the way up to the huge construction project happening right now in 2026, you're basically tracing the history of the country itself, its politics, its society, everything.
So our mission for this deep dive is to get under that famous white paint. We're going to debunk one of the biggest myths about its name, and we're going to see how presidential legacies are literally etched into the architecture.
It's a structure that has never, ever been finished. It starts with this dream of a palace, a scale that was just completely out of step with what the young republic could actually build.
So let's start there, with that first massive and ultimately unrealized vision for the capital city.
It really begins with a dream of monumental scale.
The story really kicks off with Pierre Charles L'Enfant. He was this incredibly talented but, let's say, difficult figure, an artist, an engineer, a Revolutionary War vet. And George Washington picks him in 1791 to design the entire federal city.
And at the time, this was just swampland. There was nothing there.
Right, between Maryland and Virginia.
And L'Enfant's vision was, well, it was pure Enlightenment genius, very inspired by Versailles, by the grand European capitals. He didn't just lay out a street grid. He created this whole system of geometry.
The one we still see in D.C. today.
Exactly, the grid of numbered and lettered streets, but then he overlaid it with these huge diagonal avenues. And those avenues were the key. They created these incredible sight lines connecting all the important monuments. It was almost theatrical.
And at the heart of that plan, he had two main points. The Capitol building
For the legislature.
and the president's house for the executive, except he didn't call it a house.
No, he called it the President's Palace. And that word palace is so important because it tells you everything about the scale he was imagining.
What kind of scale are we talking about?
I mean, it was immense. Our sources suggest his original design was for a building 4 or even 5 times larger than the White House that was actually built.
4 or 5 times. That's a true palace.
It would have been a massive royal-style residence. He was trying to communicate the power and permanence of this new country on a global scale. The problem was the country couldn't really afford it, politically or financially.
So if the vision was that grand and Washington seemed to like L'Enfant, what happened? Why was it abandoned?
Well, L'Enfant, for all his genius, was apparently impossible to work with. He had a military mindset and just refused to cooperate with the civilian commissioners.
He wouldn't show them the plans.
He delayed sharing them. He acted like the whole city was his personal project. And so in 1792, he was dismissed. It was a failure of administration, not of architecture.
But his core idea, the geometry of the city, that survived.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
That was critical. Washington made sure of that. L'Enfant, the man, was gone, but his map, his vision for the city's layout, that was set in stone.
So with L'Enfant out, the commissioners hold a national design competition. And this is where the actual architect, James Hoban, comes into the picture.
Right. Hoban was an Irish-born architect, already doing very well for himself down in South Carolina. He wins the competition in July 1792.
And he makes a very smart political move right out of the gate, doesn't he?
He does. A very savvy move. The prize was a medal or $500 cash. He chose the medal.
Signaling that honor meant more than money.
Exactly. And that apparently really impressed Washington. It showed he was committed to the Republic, not just the payday. And it worked. He got the job, and he later ended up supervising work on the Capitol, too.
His design was classic neoclassical style. For anyone listening, that's the style inspired by ancient Greece and Rome. Lots of symmetry, columns, a feeling of dignity.
And sources are clear. It was directly inspired by Leinster House in Dublin, which is now the home of the Irish Parliament.
But Washington didn't just accept it as is. He had notes.
He did. He told Hoban to add more stone embellishments, to make it a bit grander, to increase the scale. He wanted it to have a certain solemnity. Even if it wasn't L'Enfant's palace, it had to look the part of a nation's capital.
But then reality hits, specifically the logistics of construction. Hoban's plan was originally for a 3-story building.
3 stories plus a rusticated basement, right?
Oh, okay, you have to explain rusticated for us. What does that mean?
It's a great architectural detail. The stone on that basement level is cut in a rough, deeply textured way. It makes the building feel like it's really anchored to the ground, gives it a sense of strength. Then the 2 floors above it would have been smooth, finely dressed stone.
So that contrast gives it visual weight.
Exactly. But they couldn't do the 3 stories. They had to scale it back to 2 stories plus the basement.
Why? What was the issue?
It all came down to the stone, the raw material. The commissioners were worried they just didn't have enough of that porous Aquia Creek sandstone.
The stone they were getting from the quarry in Virginia.
Right. And they needed a massive amount of it for the Capitol building, which was even bigger, so they had to compromise. They cut the president's house down by a full story to make sure there was enough stone to go around for both projects.
It's incredible to think that the final look of this iconic building was dictated by the output of a quarry 40 miles away.
It really is a supply chain issue, basically.
But there's this one amazing detail where L'Enfant's original vision is saved by Washington himself, the corner stake story.
Yes, this is a fantastic moment. It's August 1792, and Washington is on site. The commissioners want to move the building's location just a little bit to the southeast
Why?
to get a better, more direct line of sight down Pennsylvania Avenue to the Capitol. It was a practical suggestion.
But Washington saw the bigger picture.
He understood the geometry. L'Enfant had based the entire plan for the city on a perfect north-south axis that ran right through the center of where the president's house was supposed to be. Moving it would throw the whole design off.
So what did he do?
He listened to them, and then he walked over to a wooden stake that L'Enfant himself had hammered into the ground to mark the center of the north front of his original palace design.
And he said,
He ordered that the center of Holben's new, smaller house be placed on that exact spot. No changes. That single decision locked the building into L'Enfant's grand plan forever.
so the vision survived, even if the visionary didn't. Okay, we've covered the architects and the plans. Now we need to talk about who actually built it. And this is a much harder truth.
It is. This is absolutely essential to understanding the full story.
Yeah.
You can't build a capital city from scratch without a massive amount of labor.
The commissioners first tried to recruit skilled workers from Europe, right, from Scotland and Ireland.
They did, but the sources say that effort was, and this is a quote, dismal.
Why couldn't they get people to come?
Well, first, Europe was in the middle of the French Revolutionary Wars, so crossing the Atlantic was dangerous. But the bigger issue was slavery.
How so?
The new federal district was on land from Maryland and Virginia, 2 slaveholding states. The presence of enslaved labor drove wages down so low that skilled European craftsmen just weren't interested. They couldn't compete.
So the only real solution, and this became the central, painful reality of the project,
Was to rely heavily on African Americans, most of them enslaved, to do the bulk of the work, not just for the White House, but for the Capitol, for everything.
and this was a direct result of the Capitol's location.
Absolutely. The decision to place the Capitol there intertwined the entire construction project with the institution of slavery from day one.
Let's get into the specifics of how that worked, the hiring out system.
It was a brutal economic system. A slave owner would lease their enslaved workers to the government commissioners by the month or by the year.
And the owner would get paid for their labor.
A lot, actually. The records show about 21 pounds per year, which is a very substantial amount of money back then. Of course, the enslaved man doing the work saw none of it. It all went to his owner.
And what were the conditions like for the laborers themselves?
Extremely harsh. They were given 2 meals a day, mostly cornmeal, maybe some pork or beef sometimes. They lived in these small, crude wooden huts right on the construction site and got very basic medical care. But the work was relentless.
And it wasn't just unskilled work like digging. They were doing highly skilled trades.
That's a critical point. They weren't just moving dirt. They were the ones in the quarry cutting the Aquia Creek sandstone.
The same stone we just talked about.
The very same. That meant drilling, blasting, cutting huge blocks of stone, then dragging it with oxen for 40 miles. It was incredibly dangerous work. But they also sawed lumber, they made bricks, they did carpentry and stonemasonry.
The sources say the commissioners were so impressed with the quality of their work, they expanded their roles.
It just shows the immense talent that was being suppressed. And that leads to the really hard part of this story, trying to find their identities. The records are so fragmented. We know of at least 200 enslaved individuals who worked on the project.
And this practice went right to the top.
It did. James Hoban, the architect himself, owned 4 enslaved men, Peter, Ben, Harry, and Daniel. He brought them with him from South Carolina specifically to work on the White House.
And the way they were documented, it almost seems designed to erase them.
It does. A payroll record would just list a first name, the owner's name, and an N for Negro. So you'd see an entry like N. Jacob George Fenwick. That's it. It effectively hides the immense contribution of hundreds of people.
Now, we should also acknowledge the role of the European craftsmen, specifically the Scottish master masons. They did the really intricate carving, right?
Yes, the very detailed work, like the beautiful rose and garland carvings over the north door, those were done by Scottish masons.
But they weren't working in a vacuum.
Not at all. They were working side by side with the enslaved laborers, training them on the spot, both at the quarry and on the building site. So it was this forced collaboration of European expertise and enslaved American labor that created the final product.
So when you look at those walls today, you're seeing both the highest ideals of a new democracy and the deep tragedy of its greatest hypocrisy.
Every single stone holds both of those stories. It's a profound contradiction.
A history that was almost wiped out just 14 years after the building is finished. Let's move into that crisis. And finally, let's settle the debate over that famous nickname.
Okay.
All right, let's just tackle the big one head on. The myth that pretty much every American kid learns in school. The White House was painted white to cover up the scorch marks from when the British burned it in 1814. True or false?
It's a great story, and it's definitively false.
I knew it.
And the proof is in the stone itself. As we've been saying, it was built with that porous Aquia Creek sandstone, which is very soft and absorbs water like a sponge.
And in a DC winter with freezing and thawing, that's not good.
It's a disaster. It's a process called spalling. Water gets in the cracks, freezes, expands, and basically blows the face of the stone off. So to protect their investment, they had to coat it with something right away.
So when did they first paint it or whitewash it?
The first coat, a lime-based whitewash, was applied in 1798.
1798? That's 2 years before John Adams even moved in.
And 16 years before the British Army showed up. It was purely a protective measure, a sealant. Later, after the fire, they switched to a more durable white lead paint in 1818, but the building was already white.
So the name is just a coincidence of color and catastrophe. What did people actually call it back then?
The official names were very formal: President's Palace, Presidential Mansion, President's House.
But people were already calling it the White House informally, right?
Yes, that nickname was common in newspapers by 1811, 3 years before the fire. It was a big white building in a city of mostly brick and wood. The name just stuck.
So when did it become official?
Not for a very long time. For most of the 19th century, the official name on documents was the Executive Mansion. It wasn't until 1901 that Theodore Roosevelt made it official with an executive order. He just declared, from now on, it's the White House.
He just settled it once and for all. Okay, so let's talk about the actual fire. The War of 1812, August 24th, 1814. A low point for the young country.
Absolutely devastating. British troops marched into Washington and set the president's house on fire. The entire interior was destroyed. The roof collapsed. It was just a burned-out shell.
But there is one famous story of a rescue from that day.
Yes, Dolly Madison. She famously saved the iconic Gilbert Stuart portrait of George Washington, making sure it was taken down and evacuated before the British arrived. She knew its symbolic value was immense.
And the country's response was immediate. They decided to rebuild right there.
Immediately, they brought back James Hoban, the original architect, to oversee the reconstruction. They had to rebuild the entire inside of the building within those charred stone walls.
And President Monroe moved back in just 3 years later in 1817. But the iconic look we know today with the big columns, that came later.
That's right. The porticos were the final piece of Hoban's vision. The big, curved south portico was added in 1824. And then the famous north portico, the one that faces Pennsylvania Avenue, that was finished in 1829 under Andrew Jackson.
So those defining features were added decades after the first cornerstone was laid. It really shows how this building has always been evolving.
Constantly. Which brings us to the 20th century and the changes that really created the modern presidency as we know it.
By the end of the 1800s, the White House was functionally a mess.
A total mess. It was trying to be the president's private home, a place for state dinners, and the entire office of the executive branch all in one building.
And the president's offices were literally just rooms on the second floor of the house.
Right next to the family bedrooms. Imagine trying to run the country while your kids are running down the hall. It was completely inefficient.
Enter Theodore Roosevelt, a man who liked efficiency.
He saw the problem immediately. And his big idea, his key contribution, was the operational split. In 1902, he hired the big architectural firm of the day, McKim, Mead & White, to do a massive renovation.
And the core of that renovation was moving the offices out.
Exactly. They built a temporary executive office building on the west side of the main house. And that, of course, became what we now know as the West Wing.
And that created the modern separation, the residence on one side, the office on the other.
It was a fundamental change in how the presidency worked. As part of that, TR also got rid of this huge old Victorian greenhouse that was sitting on the lawn.
But the most famous room in the West Wing, the Oval Office, that wasn't part of TR's original plan.
No, the oval shape came a little later. In 1909, President Taft expanded the West Wing, and he built the first Oval Office.
The first one.
Right, because the one we know today is actually in a different spot. In 1934, Franklin D. Roosevelt did another big overhaul of the West Wing. He added a second story, and he moved the Oval Office to its current location in the southeast corner.
Which gave him that direct access to the Rose Garden.
Exactly, and that's been the layout ever since. But presidents keep tweaking it, layering their own needs on top of it.
Richard Nixon is a great example.
Two very different marks he left. In 1970, he took FDR's old swimming pool, which was under the press area, and he converted it into the modern press briefing room.
So he took a place for relaxation and turned it into arguably the most high-stress room in Washington.
Pretty much. And then for his own relaxation, in 1973, he had a single-lane bowling alley installed in the basement.
The irony is incredible. But while all these changes were happening, the original 18th century structure was, well, it was starting to fail.
It was literally falling apart. By the late 1940s, the building was dangerously unstable. Centuries of renovations, the weight of the new wings, the original wood beams, it was all just giving out.
There were stories of chandeliers swaying for no reason.
And a leg of Margaret Truman's piano punching right through the floor of the second story. It was that bad.
So this leads to the most dramatic renovation of all, the Truman Reconstruction.
I would say it's the most important moment in the building's physical history. From 1948 to 1952, President Truman oversaw what they called a total reconstruction.
That sounds drastic. What did they do?
It was an incredible engineering feat. They basically gutted the entire building. Everything except the original outer sandstone walls was dismantled and taken out.
So they just left the shell standing.
Exactly. They propped up the 200-year-old walls with scaffolding, and then they built a brand new, modern, steel-framed interior structure inside of it.
So the White House we see today is actually a 1950s steel building wearing a 1790s stone coat.
That is the perfect way to put it. It's the ultimate architectural paradox. The Truman family had to live across the street in Blair House for 4 years while this was going on.
And when they moved back, they got one very famous new addition.
The Truman balcony. That was added to the south portico during the Reconstruction. It was controversial at the time. People thought it was too modern. But it's become an iconic feature.
So the fire of 1814 gets all the attention, but the Truman Reconstruction actually changed the building far more.
Far more. It saved the building's life. But it took another remarkable person to save its soul.
If Truman saved the physical structure, it was really First Lady Jacqueline Kennedy who saved the history inside it.
Absolutely. When she arrived in the early 1960s, she was just appalled. For 150 years, historic furniture, art, artifacts, they'd just been sold off or taken by departing presidents. There was no system.
She wanted to change it from just a house into a museum.
A living national shrine, that was her phrase. She knew that its preservation couldn't just be left up to each new administration. It needed a permanent structure.
And to do that, she founded an organization.
In 1961, she founded the White House Historical Association, a private, nonprofit group that could raise money and acquire historic pieces for the collection.
And her work led to an actual change in the law.
This is the crucial part. Also in 1961, Congress passed a law officially declaring the White House a museum. That meant its historic furnishings could no longer just be sold or given away. If something was taken out of use, it had to go to the Smithsonian for safekeeping.
And they created a permanent curator position, too.
Right. LBJ formalized that with an executive order in 1964. So now there was a professional staff dedicated to preserving the history.
And the collecting has been ongoing ever since.
The Pat Nixon administration was incredibly active, acquiring over 600 artifacts in the 70s. But the collection has also evolved to tell a broader story.
That's a good example of that.
A great one is the painting Resurrection by Alma Thomas. It was painted in 1966, acquired in 2015, and it was the first work by an African-American woman to be added to the permanent collection.
And there are also these smaller, quieter pieces that provide a sense of continuity.
For sure. Like the Seymour clock. It's this beautiful clock made in Boston around 1800. It's been in the Oval Office in almost every administration since 1975. a quiet link to the early days of the Republic.
And of course, presidents continue to personalize the space, especially the Oval Office, to send a message.
Always. When President Biden took office, he removed a portrait of Andrew Jackson and added a bronze bust of the civil rights activist Cesar Chavez. These are small changes, but they're powerful signals about an administration's priorities.
The grounds evolved too.
Definitely. Michelle Obama planted the first big organic vegetable garden and added beehives. More recently, President Trump added large flagpoles to the lawns and had the Rose Garden paved to accommodate more people for events.
The building and the grounds are always adapting.
They have to. Which brings us to the biggest adaptation in 70 years, happening right now.
For its entire history, the White House has had a space problem, specifically for large-scale events.
A huge problem. The staterooms are beautiful, but they're small by modern standards. The biggest, the East Room, can only seat about 200 people for a dinner. For a global superpower, that's just not enough.
So to solve that problem, President Donald J. Trump initiated construction of the White House State Ballroom in 2025. This is a massive project.
The biggest physical change since Truman. To do it, they had to demolish the entire East Wing.
The building that housed the visitors' entrance and offices.
Right. Demolition started in October 2025 to clear the ground for this new 90,000 square foot facility.
And the new ballroom is designed to address that capacity issue head-on.
It's designed for a seated capacity of 650 guests, so it more than triples what the East Room could handle. And the architecture is designed to mirror the classical style of the main house, so it feels connected.
Construction is moving fast, I understand.
Very fast. It began in September 2025, with the goal of being finished before the end of his term.
And the funding for this is also very different. It's not public money.
No, the $250 million cost is being covered entirely by private donations from President Trump and other donors. It bypasses Congress completely.
So for anyone listening who wants to visit, how does this massive construction project affect public tours right now in 2026?
It has a huge impact. The tour route is now truncated, is the official word. It's shorter.
You can still go, but you have to plan way ahead.
Way ahead. You have to request tickets 21 to 90 days in advance through your member of Congress. The tours are still free, but they're limited.
So what can you still see? What parts of the historic house are open?
You can still see the core state floor rooms. The blue room, red room, green room, the state dining room, the cross hall. You still get that essential sense of the historic residence.
But a lot of key areas are now off limits because of the construction.
That's right. The East Room itself is closed. The China Room, the library, the Vermeil Room, all of those areas on the ground floor and the east side are restricted. The entire eastern part of the complex is an active construction site.
And the schedule can change at any moment.
Instantly. It's critical to check with the visitor's office before you go because cancellations are common.
So the building is simultaneously making history, hosting history, and being physically rebuilt. That's really the perfect summary.
It really is.
So we end on this great paradox. The White House is supposed to be this permanent symbol of democracy, but it's in a constant state of change. It's been burned, gutted, and now it's being dramatically expanded.
And that expansion connects right back to the very beginning. L'Enfant's original vision was for a palace on a monumental scale. And now, with this new state ballroom, the building is finally getting the capacity and scale needed to function as the center of a 21st century world power.
The ambition is finally matching the reality.
Exactly. And it makes you think about all the other buildings around it, like the massive Eisenhower Executive Office building next door.
That wasn't always an office building.
No, it was originally the State, War, and Navy building, a symbol of America's post-Civil War power. Its function has completely changed. These buildings are constantly adapting.
So when you visit the White House, or even just look at pictures of it, what's the most important thing to remember from all this history?
I think it's that the most enduring part of the White House isn't the stone or the steel. It's the layers of human history inside it.
From the enslaved people who built it to the first ladies who preserved it.
Exactly. So you have to ask yourself, when you're looking at those reams, are you seeing James Hoban's original vision? Or are you seeing the collective will of every generation that has reshaped it for its own time?
That's a great final thought. The little changes, like swapping out a portrait in the Oval Office, they're just miniature versions of these massive reconstructions that have defined the building from the very start. Every change is a statement.
History isn't static there. It is constantly being built.
An incredible story. I really encourage everyone listening to look up photos of the Truman reconstruction. Seeing the building as just an empty shell is truly mind-bending. You will never look at it the same way again. Thanks for joining us for the deep dive.